The King's Choice Story. King Gustav trotted on horseback through the woods with his royal attendants. In less than a week he must leave his country for a long journey. But which of his 6 counselors should he put in charge of his land, his queen and his infant son? One of the counselors was too bossy, another too young, one given to drink, one overly concerned with money, another overly concerned with his hair, and the last one was uninspiring. Any of the counselors could rise to become a fine leader, thought the king, but which one had the necessary inner strength? Suddenly, from the river's mist a form rose and took the shape of a woman. The king ordered his train to stop. The womanly form smiled. The king relaxed. She must be a fairy, thought he, and a friendly one at that. "Sire," said the fairy in a pleasant voice, "you will have your answer." The fairy waved her wand. While the king's train continued to the palace, the king now stood on the ground by the river, watching the likeness of his own royal self ride on his horse toward the palace. Looking down at his clothes, the king saw that he was now dressed as a common woodcutter, and in one hand he held an axe instead of a sword. The fairy smiled and waved her wand toward the edge of the woods. Instantly, a woodcutter's cottage appeared. "What's the meaning of all this?" demanded the king, a rage beginning to build. "This fairy may not be so friendly after all." "Your Majesty," said the fairy in the same light, sing-song voice, "soon you will have a chance to help your 6 counselors. Be sure to invite them to dinner at your woodcutter's cottage 3 days hence." She vanished. Suddenly, the king noticed on the river a boat that was starting to rock wildly, for a windstorm had come up. By the sound of the voices on board, the king recognized the voices of his own 6 counselors. The wind whirled about, wrapping his woodcutter's garments tightly around him. Meanwhile, the boat nearly tipped over, and the voices on board shrieked. At once, the king, a strong swimmer, dove into the river and swam toward the boat. Jumping on board, he took the oars from the rowers and managed to steer the craft safely to shore. The 6 counselors, nearly giddy with relief, stepped off the boat. They clapped the woodcutter on the shoulder, thanking him again and again for saving their lives, and asked him to name his reward. Remembering the fairy's words in his new common status, the king bowed before them and said, "In 3 days I plan to host a feast in my cottage for my friends. It would do me great honor if such noble guests as yourself would attend." "Is that all?" said one of the counselors, "the one that's too concerned with money," noticed the king. "To have noblemen such as you in my home would do me a great honor," repeated the king. Later that night, restored to his kingly form, King Gustav was settling down to bed when a mist again formed before him and took the shape of a woman. "Your Highness," said the fairy in her soft voice, "invite your counselors to a royal banquet at the palace in 3 days to mark your departure and to announce which counselor you have selected to rule while you're away." "I haven't yet decided which one is to rule," said that king. "Besides, they cannot come. They already committed themselves to attending the woodcutter's dinner." "Indeed," said the fairy. She vanished. Next morning, the king summoned his 6 counselors. "I have been giving great thought to which one of you is best suited to assume command of the land while I'm away," said he. Each of the counselors stood up a little taller, and one of them, the one too concerned with his hair, quickly ran a comb through his hair. The king continued, "I will announce my decision at a royal banquet to be held the day after tomorrow." The 6 counselors nervously looked at one another, realizing the conflict in the date. One of them, the one that was uninspired, spoke up. Of course, sire," said he, his ears darting right and left. "We will be there." At banquet night, the king watched his counselors file in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5. He called the 5 counselors before him. "Where is Lucas?" demanded the king, referring to the youngest counselor. "He is not here," said one of the counselors, the one given to drink. And exactly why would he not attend my banquet, said the king, his voice rising. Apparently he had an engagement, said another, with a woodcutter. A woodcutter, shouted the king. Bring Lucas to me at once. An hour later, a frazzled Lucas was led before the king's throne. Exactly where were you tonight, Lucas? Asked the king sternly, pointing his ranged finger at the young man's face, when I specifically ordered you to attend my banquet. I had accepted an invitation to dine with a woodcutter, said Lucas, as the 5 councillors tittered, or so I thought, though what I want there tonight, the cottage that had been there only a few days ago seems to have disappeared. Not only do you stand up the king, your own royal liege. The king was now shouting. But you do so to attend dinner with a woodcutter, and one whose cottage isn't even there. Sire, I had accepted, is all he could say. As I accept you, said the king, his shoulders dropping and his voice softening. He lifted his infant son from his queen's lap and handed the child to his youngest councillor. Lucas, not only did you keep a commitment you had made, but you did so even at the risk of my own royal anger. Thus, you showed the inner strength to be a true leader. While I'm away, you are the one I entrust with the affairs of my kingdom, my queen, and our royal child.